This is a joint work with Francis Bloch and Damian Ribaja from Colmex. Indeed, it deals with a variant of the line of papers that presented Joanna this morning. So we will be short on the discussion of the literature. Specifically, what we have in mind, what we study is the case of Paris subsidized housing program. So you shouldn't believe that it's a small program indeed. If we look at the eligibility criteria, the estimation is that 70% of households are indeed eligible to one of the many programs of subsidized housing. Of course, it doesn't mean that all of them get a subsidized housing. Indeed, nowadays, subsidized housing is a stock that represents about 15% of all housing in Paris, downtown Paris. And the idea of the present administration is to reach 20% of the whole housing within 5 years. So why is it so high, the percentage of subsidized housing? Because indeed the main goal of this program is to promote, we don't know what the best traduction, so we didn't translate, what we call mixité sociale, which means that if you're from the middle class, you work for a ministry, or if you're a butcher, or whatever, so it's not very easy for you to live in downtown Paris. Nevertheless, people give a lot of value to the fact, especially politicians, to the fact that, yes, anyway, if your child go to school, you should have access to a mix of the population. So not only the very rich and the very poor. The very poor, of course, because many people live in bad housing conditions. So we don't want a city, in a sense, that is too much polarized geographically. Okay. Indeed, it contrasts sharply with respect to tradition of other countries, where subsidized housing is dedicated to low-income people. It's never too low-income people, because people, when you have an administration, we have in mind that people should be able to maintain properly the apartments and so on. But usually in Anglo-Saxon tradition, it's dedicated exclusively to low-income people, which means that these programs, they deal with population which are rather homogeneous. So what they can do is to have a list of criteria, and from this list of criteria, they can apply it universally, and this is quite good if you want to implement the policy. And it's very good indeed, also in terms of transparency of the programs. Okay, so one example of this Anglo-Saxon tradition, you can go to many cities in England or North America. I think Toronto is one that has a very nice web page if you're interested in the program. So what you do basically is that you fill in an online questionnaire where you describe all the relevant data for the scoring, so your age, income of the members of the households, what's your job, health situation, housing situation, and so on. It's a scoring system, so to each criteria is associated a number of points. Points are summed up, and from this we can construct a priority order. So take care. It doesn't mean that in this in these programs, there is no heterogeneity. Yes, there is, for two reasons. It's not because there is only one kind of set of criteria, that there is one single priority for each apartment. Why? Because first of all, the size of the apartment matters. I mean, a one room or two rooms apartment will not be given to a family with 5 children and the other way around. And what they take into account is also the location of the apartment, especially with respect to where you work. But well, even if there is heterogeneity, all is carried out online. So every 2 weeks, or regularly, there is an update of the database. People have to fill in again their own data, and people report their preferences on the set of on the pool of apartments which are free, and they follow an algorithm, and everything is transparent, and that's quite nice. On the contrary, what happens in Paris is really complicated. So it's true that still there are some programs which are dedicated to less privileged people, but the main objective is to avoid segmentation, geographical segmentation of the city between downtown Paris and the suburbs. And what is very messy indeed is the fact that by law, each big institution, I mean ministry, but also firms, they have to, and this is calculated on your wage, they have to finance this social housing. So it means that in the many different programs, you will have French state involved, ministries, Paris Council, one of the 20 city halls of the city, Bank of France, National Railway, and so on and so forth. So these are many institutions. It's good on the one hand because it's beneficial to the financing of the programs. I mean, there is a lot of money involved in these programs, but it's bad in terms of the fact that all these institutions do not apply at all the same criteria. So how do we do the assignment? Well, the idea is nowadays is that all goes through committees. The transparency of committees has improved in the sense that now it's like a two stages committees. A first stage, one committee has to propose 3 names, and another committee among these 3 names picks one particular name. But anyway, there is a lot of let's say little transparency about what are the rules that follow these committees. And indeed, our objective is simply to know whether we can accommodate this problem within what will be ideally an online scoring system. Okay, so here I don't want to restate the discussion of the literature that presented Joanna this morning, but there are for me 2 lines. One that says, okay, what we want is to level the playing field, which are, in my interpretation, the soft bounds of Hiller, Safadir, Lianmes, and Lildrin. But here, indeed, we follow the hardbound interpretation. And so it means that for the purpose of our exercise, what we want to impose in the final allocation is the mixité, what we will call the mixité social condition. Okay, so it means that even if it might hurt some agents individually, what we will have is that we want to impose quotas of each institution to the final allocation. There are two differences with respect to this literature. The first one is that we are going to consider only one quota by institution. So there is no lower quota and upper quota, only one quota. And there is another difference, which you can also find in Flagiadakis and Triam, which is the fact that I can belong to two institutions. So if my wife is working for the Ministry of Education and myself, I work for Thales, well, it might be that we can enter to two different programs. So we can have some subsidized housing through two different institutions. Okay, I don't know whether the motivation is clear. Yeah. Okay, so I go to the model. I mean, what do we want to have in this model? We want to have a three-sided market with households, institutional apartments. How are they organized? It's not a symmetric model, so preferences of households are only defined over the set of apartments. That's not sure. Indeed, I don't care who gives me the apartment, what I want is the apartment. So if I get it to one institution or the other, it's not important to me. Institutions have priorities which are a little more complex. In principle, what they want is to allocate their workers the closest to their location. So their preferences is different over apartments. And for each apartment, depending on the size and so on, they will have a ranking priority order of households. And finally, something that I think seems to be pervasive in this committee is the fact that the more I finance such and such apartments as an institution, the higher my priority. So we capture that by assuming that apartments have priorities over institutions. Okay. What we do is we introduce a variation of the DA, deferred acceptance algorithm. So I'm going to be more precise about it. What we do is that we are going to nest two deferred acceptance procedures. And then, although I will go into the detail, but we will need to consider some interrupters, like in Kirsten, so as to correct some problems that arise when we look at these nesting of two DAs. So, but about results, well, what we can do proceeding this way is to accommodate the usual properties. I mean, fairness for households of the same type. The result of our mechanism is going to be Pareto and dominated within this set. It's going to satisfy mixité sociale, and truth-telling is indeed a dominant strategy in this mechanism. So the model. So we have a set of institutions, a set of quotas. So for each institution, this is the number of apartments that they will get at the end of the procedure. We have households. The type of each household is going to be the institution to which they can get subsidized housing. We have naturally the set of apartments, preferences of households over apartments, the preferences of, the priorities of institution. Well, we suppose that it's lexicographic, but in preferences of institution of our apartments, and for each apartment, the preferences of households. But indeed, this assumption is not necessary. And finally, as I mentioned previously, we have the priorities for each apartment of each institution. Meaning, the more you finance this apartment, the higher your priority to get it assigned. Okay, so an assignment, you don't need to really read the definition. I mean, there are many ways there are a few ways in which you can define this three-sided assignment. What we have chosen corresponds to the way it's going to be constructed. So, in a sense, I think it's better to go further into the detail of the algorithm. So, but in this algorithm, you look at how to assign apartment and institution, and then once you have this pair, you assign it to households, right? But you can do it another way, depending on the mechanism. The most convenient, the notation, the better. Okay. About axioms. So indeed, we are going to use the usual axioms that we adapt to the situation. So we have individual rationality. You should give to each household something which is acceptable, and to each institution a pair of apartment and household that are acceptable. We want it to be non-wasteful, so there is no empty apartment that is desired and acceptable for households in particular. We are going to be interested in justified envy, usual definition, and justified envy over households of the same type. Indeed, we are going to get our result only with fairness for households of the same type. So it will have to be individually rational, non-wasteful, without any justified envy for households of the same type. Okay. We will consider Pareto efficiency, strategy proofness, and our main condition. Indeed, I should have begun by this condition. Our assignment should respect mixité, meaning that for institution, at the final matching, we match exactly the quota of each institution. So we reach mixité sociale. Okay, here are indeed the two main slides of the presentation, where I try to explain our mechanism. So just like in any DA, we begin by looking for each household to the set of acceptable apartments. So we look at the set of acceptable apartments. Households 1 is asking for apartment 1, households 2 for A2, H3, A1, and so on and so forth. Once we have elicited the demand of households, we know through which, considering the type of all households, we know through which institution they can get their apartments. So, for instance, H3, the household 3 that wants as a first choice apartment 1, she can get it through institution 1 or institution 2. So once we have this information, what we can construct is indeed we look at the same information, but the other way around. So for each institution, we can construct all the pairs that can be matched through her. So institution 1 can be matched per A2 H5, A2 H2, and so on and so forth. Institution 2, she can get A1 and H3, A1 and H5. So these are the possible matches for this institution. What I did moreover here is I ranked this set with respect to the priority order of each institution. And from here, we can look at the demand of each institution. So if there are two cases. Suppose that there is no quota, so without our mixity constraint. In this case, institution 1 is going to ask for A2 H5 and A1 H1. Institution 2 is going to ask for A1 H3, A1 H4, and so on and so forth. And finally, if we look at the priorities of our apartments, then what we have is that in this case, institution 1 has top priority both for apartment 1 and for apartment 2. So given that demand, and given the fact that she has no quota, she will get her both H2 H5 and A1 H1. Case 2, it might be that here, yes, we have a quota constraint, so quota is 1 for each institution. In this case, well, the top choice of institution 1 is going to be A2 H5, which is what it gets. But at the same time, I2 is going to have to ask for A1 H3, and I3 is going to ask for A2 H2. So we follow the priorities of each apartment. Naturally, I3 lose against I1, so she gets nothing. But institution 2 is the only one asking for A1, so it gets it tentatively. And here is a problem, indeed. Why is it a problem? Because, of course, it gets it, but if we look at the third choice of A3, so which is A1 H1, well, so as the third choice, this institution would like to get apartment 1, and it has priority over I2. Sorry. So what does this mean? This means that when we reach this, state, we have indeed to do a DA iteration within the set MI. And this is why indeed we have two nested algorithms, right? So we have one where we do the DA iteration over MI, and we have the previous one where we have a DA iteration over the set of acceptable apartments for households. Sorry. So these two cases correspond indeed to, well, each one to one particular theorem. If there is no quota restriction, so just following the concatenation of demands that I presented here, we get all the properties that we were looking at. I mean, the NDA is fair, it's not Pareto dominated by any fair assignment, it's not a strategy proof. But what happens indeed with, if we want, I mean, this is our objective, what we want to do is to impose the mixity condition. So here there are two problems. One problem is the fact that, of course, if we follow the principle of DA, all demand should be done in the decreasing order of preferences of households. So for households, this is true, but we have a nested DA. So So as this to work, we will need to do preferences in the decreasing order of mi, but in the whole sequence of mi. And this is not the case, except by chance. But in principle, it's not going to be the case. So what can happen is that during a few steps, there is an institution that is holding an apartment. Then she gets a better demand from households, a late demand. But it happened that, so she drops the previous apartment she has. So what happens here is that in this DA, we have what Kirsten calls an interrupters. So first point, what we have to do is to properly define a type 1 interrupters. We apply the usual technique that we apply with interrupter. I mean, a delete operation in the priority orders of institution. So that's one kind of problem. And there is another kind of problem, which is the fact that, of course, DA does not aim at quota restrictions. It aims at mixité. So this means that it might be that when we follow the DN principle, institution 1 is getting A1, institution 1 is getting A2, institution 3 is getting nothing. This might be fair, but indeed, it might also be the case that it exists another matching where I1 gets A1 and A3, and it happened that A2 is acceptable for I3. So here I don't want to go into the details of how we define the interrupters, but what we say is that in this case, when we strictly follow the logic of the DA, we don't get our objective, which is to implement, first of all, whenever it exists, an assignment that cope with our quota restriction. So we define again institution 1 here as an interrupter. Again, we proceed to deleting deleting this interruption in the priority order. And indeed, what we'll get is now our, so I'm going to finish, main result, which is the fact that this procedure, which I've just described, give us the following result. If matching satisfying mixité sociale, so the quota restriction, and fairness for the same time exists, then our mechanism finds it. Moreover, it's Pareto dominated within the set of all assignments that cope with mixité sociale and fairness. But it might be that these properties are indeed not compatible. So if no matching satisfying mixité sociale also satisfy fairness for the same type, then what we find with our mechanism is mixité sociale. Again, it's not Pareto dominated. But there are also markets where there is no matching that satisfies mixité sociale. And in this case, the outcome matching is going to be fair for the same type. But anyway, what's been nice in nesting the two DA is that we respect finally the logic and the structure of DAs. So we keep on with the strategy proofness of our mechanism. Okay. And last result, but I mean, and in the appendix of the paper, we have some discussion about when is it that existence of coexistence of the properties are guaranteed or not, which are quite technical indeed. But that's the main message I wanted to giving this talk.
Is there any possibility? It is strange that the apartment are another agent in this model instead of being just object. Have you considered the possibility of incorporating this framework in something like matching with contracts, where the apartment can be objects with qualifications, given to the institution who pay more for them, or to individuals who value more, and include even the possibility of having non-feasible contracts, because you can have something like completion suitability or something like that, where you can describe things that are even not feasible.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. In terms of notation, I think we save a lot of. We have considered matching with contract, but in terms of notation, we save quite a lot, putting it as a third side of the matching market. Now, maybe I've not been, I didn't specify it, but here when I talk about strategy proofness, it's really, we only consider that household's preference revelation. So what do we need to have substitutability? Well, indeed, the structure that we impose now, but for the sake of the presentation, okay, so I lost it, is to have lexicographic. The key point for substitutability would be this priority over apartments, and then for each apartment, priority over households. But so this is here where you should impose substitutability. Okay, so here it's a little stronger because it simplifies the exposure, but it's not necessary. Indeed, this work we did it quite closely with people from the Office of Urbanism in Paris. So it's an iteration process, and at this stage, I think he is quite happy with the model. But what he says to us is that, okay, in real life, at this moment, yes, institutions use scoring rules to define priority orders of apartments. So they rank households with respect to some scoring rules, but at this stage, they don't do it public. So the movement is, let's say, what they would like to do is to go toward a fully scoring system, systematized. But at this stage, he's not sure that politically they want to disclose these the scoring that they use. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.